All right. Well, today we are going to hopefully be sharing some of the work that you folks have done over the past couple of weeks. So I'm going to have you look on the bottom of the screen, and you should see a green folder that says Share Screen. And hopefully, when it comes time, when you have something to show us, you can share your screen and show each other the work that you've been doing. So, does anybody have any questions about their screen sharing? All right, well, hearing none.
Hold on, I missed. Oh, there it is. Okay, never mind, we're good.
Okay, good, good. So, sounds good. So, welcome to our October 23rd Community of Practice. And I'm going to turn this over to Jessie. She's got a few housekeeping items to go over, and then we'll move forward.
Awesome. So, just a few highlights as you're looking at the modules. You're seeing elements that are kind of repeated to keep us tracking together. One thing I wanted to mention was the survey that's in those modules. That survey is for Sylvie and I to gather data about this community of practice experience and about just our growth as a group over time. And so if you take the survey, there is an informed consent document attached to that will give you more information about what we're looking at and how we would be using that data. And taking the survey is your form of consent. There is a question there that says, yes, I consent, no, I don't consent. So that would be the way that you give us permission to not only use the survey data, but also just your participation data in when we talk about how this community of practice has gone, what recommendations we would make, those sorts of things. Obviously, we're not going to identify any of you, and if you're concerned about that, we can show you before we disseminate any of the ways it's obviously a very small group. So if you're concerned about that, we can show you before we disseminate how we're aggregating that information to make sure you're comfortable with it. Okay. I did send out an email asking who was still thinking about diving into a more reflective, structured project. I've gotten a few people who have said yes, and a few people have said no, but just let us know. We want to kind of see who is going to be part of that subgroup that's going through IRB and those sorts of things in the next few months to get ready for the spring. So we're not throwing that information out for everybody all the time. And then the assignment activities. I think we've all been feeling kind of behind, which is totally, we're tracking with you, feeling a little bit behind. I just want you to know they're designed to take about 20 minutes. I don't want people to kind of labor over those activities. And feel like they need to be perfect before we share them, because the real magic is in how we talk about it and then turn around and apply it later. Next week, we are going to use Flipgrid again, I believe, in order to share the assignment for next week. You do need an ID code. I don't know if you remember. You need your ID code in order to post to Flipgrid. So if you don't remember what that is, look in that welcome email, that first email I probably sent you after you registered, or you can email me and I'll just look it up for you. And then we actually have 3 weeks until the next module starts instead of 2 weeks. So use the time to catch up. Any questions about module community of practice stuff?
Jessie, I had a question for you.
Yeah.
And I don't remember if it's, you've spelled out everything so wonderfully, but are we getting IRBs at our institutions? Or, okay, so that's another step in the process that we do. Okay.
Yeah, so in a few weeks, one of our activities is actually go investigate what it would require. Is there training you have to complete? And so we build time in for all of those steps. But yes, that IRB would need to be sought at your institution.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Usually these investigations are really simple, exempt category, not you know, investigative. We're not talking full board review stuff, so it should be pretty simple as long as you have a pretty good process at your institution. Any other questions? Okay, sounds good. Okay, so take a look. Today, we are gonna share, this is our sharing centric meeting. So we're gonna share what we did when we mapped a little bit of what each of us is doing onto the problem solving Pentagon, and what it showed us. So we're using it reflectively to look at ourselves as instructors. Did you all see the videos that Sylvia and I posted as an example? Yes? No? Okay. So if you didn't do this activity yet, it's still worth a little bit of time, or at least look at the video Sylvia and I posted to see different ways you could use this tool. But for those of you who did this activity, now it's your turn to share what you looked at, what you analyzed, and what it revealed to you.
I think I sort of misinterpreted what was going on because I designed an activity to teach my students the RSD.
That's great, because that's actually for next time.
Okay, well that explains why I was a little bit
You are
confused
ahead of
about
the game, Arity.
looking at what I was doing. Okay.
I know,
Anyway.
it gets confusing because what we're doing today is discussing what we finished up in this last module.
Sure.
But meanwhile, the next module just opened.
Okay. Yeah, so I did that the wrong way. So sorry.
No, that's great.
It'll be interesting to see what you have.
Mm-hmm.
So do any of you have an assignment that you've aligned that you want to share?
Yeah, so I went through this activity. I wasn't able to get the Padlet working. Every time I tried to fit anything on my screen, it would shift everything. So I ended up just
I don't know why.
Yeah. But I ended up just, you know, it's not in a pentagon anymore. I just put it as an outline format in Word. But let's see if I can find that. And
I'll stop my share so that you can share if you want, Dustin.
Okay.
I did take a look at what you did, Dustin, and it made sense to me when I looked at it.
Okay, good.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I kind of broke it down into two ways. How things are happening right now, and then later on how I would like them to work after I transform this course, you know, in next semester. Sounds ambitious, but, you know, somewhere down the road. All right, so right now, I mean, there's not a lot of embarking and clarifying going on other than just they read the lab manual and follow the instructions of the lab manual. Everything is handed to them very packaged. And so that also influences the whole rest of the experiment that they're doing. So these are, yeah, physics experiments where they get an apparatus and they follow instructions on, so turn, you know, push button A, turn knob B, and they gather some data, and then the lab manual asks them some questions and they respond to those questions. All right, so finding and generating, it's mostly just doing whatever the lab manual says. The lab manual is pretty ambiguous on some points, and so they usually just ask for my help, or they say, it tells us that we need to use one of these, where is that? And so I have to go and find that for them, bring it to them, teach them how to use it. So then so as far as evaluating and reflecting is concerned, some of the labs they're asked to measure something that's known. So the speed of light is an example. So, and when they get their results, then they usually stop and think, okay, I know what the speed of light actually is. Our measurement is a little bit off from that. Is that good enough? And if it's not, then they start, they start asking questions either to each other or to me. I'd rather it be to each other. But why didn't it come out that way? Why are we getting the wrong answer? Yeah. So then everything gets organized. Just they write down their numbers, and usually in Excel. Some of them are writing things down on paper, but most of them are doing it in Excel because then it's easier to create graphs later on. And then they graph whatever they wrote down. Then they, yeah, the analysis and synthesis is also something that I would like to happen further. But if they don't really have a question in mind, then they don't really have a context to analyze their data either. So they end up just looking at their graph saying, yep, that graph looks good, and then answering whatever questions the lab manual has. And then, so they'll discuss things as they go along with each other and write whatever kind of lab report they've been asked to write. So where I'd like to see this go is
Hey, Dustin.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm going to pause you before you go to your dream.
Okay, go.
Your dream lab. So right now, this top part, you mapped what you're already doing.
Yes.
So in the process of mapping this, what did it reveal to you? Did you get any surprises about maybe what you expect from your students, but probably isn't clear to them?
So I mean, I definitely saw what I already knew to be true, that if we can change the embark and clarify at the very beginning, that's going to trickle down into a lot of the other steps. I already knew that was something that I really need to focus on. What I was happy to see was that there actually is something going on in all of these. It's not just, we're not starting completely from scratch. There is actually some research going on, just not at a very basic level, on the far left of that framework. As far as the other areas go, I think the hand holding really can, also shows up in a lot of the other steps, and not just the embark and clarify where we tell them what to do. But I think every step along the way, I think it's still, there could be a lot more freedom added to each individual step along the way that we currently aren't doing.
Okay. And then remind me of the context. Is this a freshman physics?
So they're sophomores.
Like their first lab?
So they're sophomores, but it's really their first physics lab. So,
okay.
The way that it's structured, so when they take introductory physics, there are labs attached to those classes, but those labs are even more canned, and it's almost like a demo where they get to push the button for those classes. And also those classes are, everybody takes those introductory physics classes, the engineers, the chemists. There are a lot of different majors that are all taking those, where this class is only physics majors. So I think of it as the first real opportunity for them to start doing physics instead of doing just general science.
Okay.
Dustin, if I might ask a question. So you touched on a couple things. One was the idea about students being on the left side of the framework, so lots of directions, not much autonomy.
Yes.
And so I was listening to you, and I was thinking back to my assignments. Two things I found when I did my assignments. One was the level of autonomy, but the other one was a lack of clarity. I was giving directions here and just assuming that they could go find piece of equipment ABC. It really helped me see where my directions weren't very clear.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
was making some assumptions about how hard can it be to find a beaker in the lab. I mean, you walk over and so I was making those assumptions, but then, you know, I sat back and thought about it and like, well, if you've never been in the lab before, you probably don't know where to find the beakers, and how could I make that process more transparent for students? Did you find a distinction, anything like that, as you were walking through your process?
Not explicitly that. So just, I mean, as you're saying that, I mean, I don't feel like a lot of learning is lost if I point where the beaker cabinet is, but it's the things like the things that are frustrating me when I'm, you know, having to walk the students through everything is just that there's an expectation of if they don't know how to do something that they can't figure it out themselves. And that's the type that basically the philosophy of the whole class. I mean, I don't think that's, thinking about it, that's probably not a single class's job to change, but at least move them along towards, if you can ask a question and answer it yourself instead of having somebody answer it for you.
Okay. So let's hear the vision.
Okay. So where I would like them to be is asking their own questions, and then even after they do an experiment, stopping and reflecting. So not having it be just linear in this, going step by step, but having it be all of these steps happening at once. I think that was really good with Sylvia's activity a couple weeks ago, that pointing out that all of these things were happening at the same time. And I'd like to have that happen so that questions happen during the experiment. And so they're reflecting during the experiment and then saying, oh, we should do this because that would answer this question that we hadn't even considered at the beginning. So finding and generating net data. So based on their question, figuring out what that experiment should be. What kind of data do they need? What equipment do they need that will help them gather that data? And then evaluating it, saying, instead of just getting the data and saying, well, there's our data, taking some time to say, is this data able to answer the question that we had? So is that data good enough? Or is there just too much uncertainty in our data? Like, are the error bars too big? Are the distributions overlapping? Or, do we need to retake the data or take it in a different way, redesign our experiment? The way that the lab is structured now, they get 3 class periods to do each experiment, and that's not enough time to do this iterative process of seeing if it's good enough and redoing it and, marching along that way. So the organization probably isn't going to change that much, except for the added freedom of deciding how to present their data. So especially if they are deciding which data to collect, then that also will push them in the direction of choosing how to present that themselves. Whether that's a figure, a table, whatever it is, or what type of figure, adding that kind of freedom. Then, so the analysis and synthesis. So instead of right now, I think that the students are perceiving error analysis as something they do at the very end after they've already made their conclusions, where I want that to be more part of the process of seeing if they're able to make conclusions. And so seeing where their data is, seeing if they need more. So coupling the analysis and synthesis a lot more to the evaluate and reflect, where I think they should be more connected than they are now. And then something that I've actually already started implementing in the labs is communicating in a lot of different forms. So it's physics lab classes that, well, the course that I inherited was very based on you take your data, you publish it as a journal article. Where there's something that I've been emphasizing this semester as I've been teaching, kind of making things up as I go, but that there are a lot of different types of communication that we do in physics, not just journal articles. So emailing your supervisor, a press release, a presentation, so funding applications, lots of different ways that we still package the data much in the same way, but with a different flavor. And I think the students can learn a lot by learning to communicate in a lot of different ways. So that's going to be one area of emphasis going forward.
I really love that emphasis on different ways to communicate data. Like, I really struggle with my students to convey that they are not just consumers of information, but they are also creators of information and information and science content. And like this idea of multiple ways to report their findings, I think is really cool.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I still wonder if they are fully taking ownership. I think that's probably something that will evolve as they go along, because I mean, if they're measuring the speed of light, using that example again, so it's hard to convince them that they're actually contributing new information to the scientific community, because the scientific community already knows what the speed of light is. But I think that requires a more significant redesign of what experiments are there, because there's really no way to make the speed of light original research that I can think of anyway. But yeah, so this is again where we have some equipment that's available, but I'm struggling exploring how to turn that into free experiments where they just are taking the equipment and playing with it or asking their own questions.
Yeah, I have a lot of ideas already popping into my brain about this. I too love that emphasis on communicating differently, because it really points to that information literacy issue of, like already said, students not seeing that information is created, not necessarily just discovered, and that how it's communicated, there's ethical implications for that, how scientific information especially is communicated. And so you may, for your project, I think you already know that biting off this whole redesign is probably going to be too big for next semester, but what you may want to do is incubate just that communicate and apply idea and revamp that in your course and really enrich that area and test that out and see how it goes for you.
Yeah, so they've already been doing that a little bit. So yeah, but I like the idea of making that something more measurable.
Dustin, I have an idea. It's something I actually am trying this semester, and I found it, I have to wait till the end of the semester to see how it works, but I'm finding it pretty interesting. And you're going down a path that I went down, still am going down, this idea about students taking ownership for their learning. And as you were talking, there was two things that stuck with me, that you want your students to demonstrate independent thinking, and you also want them to connect error analysis with the process they're doing along the way. And those are the things you sounded really passionate about and you want your students to get. So I'm wondering, in the vein of explicitly stating expectations, if you could, in your course say, or in a lesson say, while you're doing this lesson, in addition to the lab, I want you to choose a way to demonstrate independent thinking, and I want you to show me how you incorporated error analysis along the way. Don't care what method you use. Don't care how you want to share that, but the expectation will be at the end of this lesson, you will have demonstrated that. And give them perhaps a couple of examples and links to some web pages. You might have them do I had my students go out and actually take a look and have a discussion before I did that. I didn't do it with those two things. I told them by the end of the semester, I want you to demonstrate how you took educational risk, how you showed educational growth. And you choose how you do that. Here's a list of web pages. Go look, go discuss, I had them discuss it for an hour. And then I've had them reflect off and on throughout the semester. But I sat down and kind of did what you did. This is what's frustrating. My students aren't thinking critically. They're just sitting there like sponges. So I threw it out there, and I just said, you got to demonstrate it and you got to figure it out. And for the first week, they were really uncomfortable. They're starting to get used to it. I've gotten them to do some reflections and create web pages, or I gave them a day or two to work on their demonstration, whatever that's going to be. Some of them chose to do web pages. They have a semester to do it in my class, not just a lesson. But I'm wondering if that's what you're passionate about and that's what you really want students to do. Can you just make that an explicit part of the lesson here, and you figure out how to do it? And that actually puts the responsibility on them instead of on you, and it might make an interesting experiment for you.
Yeah, that does sound interesting. So right now in the existing class, so I'm more or less this semester, since it's my first semester here, just taking whatever people have done before me and reproducing it. But so there's an existing lesson or two at the beginning of the semester, just introducing basic error analysis techniques and basically teaching them the mechanics of this is how you calculate a standard deviation. This is how, if you calculate a standard deviation of one thing, how it affects things that you use down the line from your calculations and that sort of thing. But it sounds like what you're suggesting is making it almost like an independent research project where they go out and find their new favorite error analysis technique and then present that to the class.
For me, I would at the end of the lesson, they give me a topic for one of the lessons where they're doing error analysis in. Is it like finding the speed of light?
Right.
So what I would say, I would just put it in the criteria. Here's your lab. You're going to take a look at the speed of light. And I want you at the end of the lesson to be able to demonstrate. So you have grading criteria, and at one of them, and just add a criteria, I want you to be able to talk to me or tell me, or I want you to demonstrate where you used error analysis as you were solving this problem.
Okay.
And then leave it to them to figure out how they're going to do it. And they'll look at you and say, well, how am I supposed to do that? Or more importantly, well, what do you want? And my response to them is a smile, and I say, what do you need to demonstrate that you've used it? And they're going to prod and push and want you to answer that. And I just tell my students I'm being intentionally vague because it's time for you to critically think. What do you need to demonstrate that you know this? And make it low stakes so they get comfortable with it. So I'm pretty lenient, with the first time. Great, you tried one or two things. Now, is that enough? Have a discussion about it. Is that good? Where does science use it? How you can tie information literacy skills into it. So I've tried to be better at tying to the information literacy skills. And talk to them about how they're creating, they themselves are becoming experts in this, so they're creating their knowledge base so they can have those discussions. But yeah, just throw it onto them with enough guidance that they know what the criteria are, but not so that you're giving them answers that they have to go wrestle and struggle and think about it.
Yeah.
I add in there, so in our upper level junior and senior labs, they cannot get an A unless they do something that we didn't ask them to do. So we have this built in that they have to show us that they have gone above and beyond what the requirements are. But in a context like this, I really like what Sylvia was saying. Like, you have this very low stakes statement where you're just saying, show me what you've learned. And maybe as a way to trial this, you could consider doing it as an extra credit piece, because that's what I do in our freshman labs. Above and beyond is not part of the requirements for the freshman classes, but asking them, making it available as an extra credit piece. If you do something more than I have asked you to do, and you've shown me something else, then I will give you extra credit for that. And then it's available at any point throughout the semester. If a particular experiment and they do something above and beyond, then I can say, hey, this is worthy of some extra credit, good job. And that makes it a way that you're not penalizing students who aren't quite at that level yet, but you're getting students who are at that level to start thinking about it. And particularly as a first course in a series, then you're building up this expectation and you're getting students to start thinking about that as a requirement for later classes.
Yeah, I kind of want to build on what Arity was saying as far as like, so you want to move all these categories kind of up. We're going to talk more about levels of autonomy next time we meet, but you're hoping to move pretty much all these categories up, I think, in complexity, which doesn't necessarily mean they have all that autonomy depending on how you scaffold and support it. But you're hoping that they move up. And in 15 weeks, I just want to think about how much ambiguity can you ask them to move through in a meaningful way so that they build meaningful schema. If they don't have the main framework yet of the whole kind of thinking that way, like they haven't crossed some of these thresholds yet, and so they don't think like an expert, things that come naturally to you yet. And I'm even, I'm mostly looking at the Embark and Clarify, asking own questions that are answerable using available equipment. We found when we talked as a community of practice a lot that we tend to think that students can come up with their own researchable question. And that's actually a skill that's kind of expert, to be able to frame a question that's answerable using the framework or tool that we're hoping that they move through. And so I just want you to be aware of that.
Yeah,
that
definitely.
If you're hoping to really hone in on their evaluation and reflection and their tolerance of ambiguity in other areas, you may actually want to, at least in the beginning, feed them the questions, and maybe toward the end, then they have to come up with an answerable question, or that they're probably going to need a lot of assistance with that. Yeah. And if they get stuck there, they can't move through the rest.
Yeah, so I mean, part of this is, I mean, I'm thinking already a few steps down the road, because so the department's kind of giving me this class to begin the transformation of all of the classes.
Yeah. And
so I'm already thinking, where do I want the students to be at the time of graduation?
Yeah.
I have to figure out, basically subdivide those expectations into what can they accomplish by the end of the first semester of their sophomore year, which, so I'm thinking around here, at least where I'm thinking of going next semester is having a few questions that I know are answerable available to them, and then they pick some, not knowing which pieces of equipment it connects to.
Yeah.
But so that, it's not all the way there, but it's at least a step in the right direction.
Yep. And you're going to love, because you do get to touch all the way up, it sounds like you will get to touch all the way up. You're going to love using the RSD, along with writing really good outcomes and using Bloom's taxonomy with some skill, like envisioning where you want them to be and then working backwards.
Right.
I'm excited to see how this fleshes out.
We'll see. I'm excited to see it too.
Yeah, right. Okay.
So, does anybody else have an alignment they want to share?
I did one. Arity, I know you're taking it from the faculty side. Did you want to go first? Because mine's going to be library session.
I'm trying to figure out how to unshare my screen. Just a minute.
I think you usually go up to the top and there's a little red piece under view options that
got it.
says stop share. Yeah.
Okay. I don't have anything to share because I did it all on a piece of paper in front of me. And I can sort of revamp what I've been doing. So what I did was I thought about an existing activity that I'm doing and how it supports the RSD and how I can make that more explicit. So I think maybe now that I heard what Dustin did and I'm thinking a little bit more about this, I kind of did a combination of sort of what you were asking for next week and what you were asking for this week. And this is not for my physics classes, this is for my freshman class. And I've been really somewhat frustrated with their well-honed and well-trained ability to give me exactly the answer or the question that they think I want. And that is not what I want, but it's what they think I want, right? And I want them to ask deeper questions. And so I came up with this idea of, I'm gonna show you this thing, okay? So there's this thing. This is basically what I do to my students. I walk around and I stick this thing in their face and they look at it and then I say, write me 10 questions on this. And I don't care what they are. I don't care if you know the answer. You just have to write 10 questions, okay? And I didn't give them any context for this. I just asked them to write these questions. So they turn them in and I'd look through them and they're pretty typical. Like, what does it feel like? What color is it? How much does it weigh? All of these very like fact-based questions, right? So I let them sit on this for about 2 or 3 class days. And then I come back and we do it again. I carry it out and I'm like, 10 more questions, right? And so they've now written me 20 questions on this. And at this point, they're kind of goofy questions. They're like, does it conduct electricity? Will it float? You know, they're still fact-based questions, but they're letting go of their prejudgment for their questions, because often what I find is students will ask a question or not, they'll have a question, but they won't ask it because they prejudge it and decide it's stupid. And I want them to get past that idea. So then they turn them in, I take a look at them and turn it back. We do this the 3rd time, and now my students hate this thing. They hate it so much. So at this point now they have 30 questions about this object, and now they're getting into interesting questions. They're like, who made it and what were they thinking while they made it? So they're these questions that are not, like in a broader context, they're questions that aren't Googleable. You can't just search it and find somebody to present you the answer. And so I'm trying to use this as a way for students to think about asking questions as a critical part of the learning process, and that just because you know the answer to the question or just because you don't know the answer to the question doesn't mean it's like a bad question. And so to start thinking about how does the type of question we're asking relate to where we will do research for it and how we will find that information, and is it something that we can just look up, or is it something that we need to compile lots of information together to get an idea about it? So I came up with this semester, and I'm in the midst of doing it. They've turned in their 30 questions. And on Friday, I think I'm going to go through and get them to start sorting their questions into types of questions, and then basically start thinking about how can I tie this to the RSD Pentagon and the various steps that we have here. So that's kind of where I'm at with this project.
I love it. I love it so much. I'm geeking out over here. My mind is probably going to twist on that for a while.
Oh, that's okay. I share what you think about this, because yeah, right now I'm at the point like they hate it. They hate everything about it. But
Which is kind of like writing your doctoral dissertation, right? Because by the end, you hate all the questions.
Yeah. So I'm really excited to see where it goes, and I love their questions. Like, I just love looking at the types of questions that they're asking and how they've changed from like the first 10 to the last 10.
Are you going to show them their growth visually? Like, are you compiling their questions and like going to show them how they move from maybe fact to concept?
Yeah, what I'm thinking of doing is they have small work groups. So I think that I'm going to put them all into their small work groups and then give them all their questions back. So then each of them will have 30 questions. And I'm going to ask them to sort, like compare and contrast across the individuals, like what types of questions did you have? And then I think I'm going to split on the board. I think I'm going to section off a couple of places on the wall and say these are like fact-based questions. These are like one layer deep questions. And then these are totally novel questions. And I think this is matching a little bit with what Sylvia was talking about as the commonly known, commonly unknown, and then the totally unknown. And I want them to, I'm thinking of asking them to put the questions on Post-its and then also mark on the Post-it which of the, did they come from the first 10, the second 10, or the third 10? And then put those up on the board. And then so each group will have a series of Post-its that they put on the board so we can go from the individual to the small group to talking about it as a large group. That's kind of my concept for how this is going to play out.
And then I love the thought of taking it a step further and then saying, how would you answer this fact-based question differently than this novel question?
Yeah.
Because then it starts to show the differences between like literature review or even just like encyclopedia source versus now I need an original research strategy or research strategy with an original question and I have to go out and gather data.
Yeah.
I'm starting to see the frame of how information is created.
That's my goal, is to be able to tie it to that, to say, you know, in this context, you could, here's something where you could factually look it up on a Wikipedia thing about this object, right? Versus something where you would have to go back and maybe do an interview of the person who made it, versus, you know, maybe you would read some research about the ethical considerations. It's a little felted basket. So the ethical considerations of shearing sheep,
Right.
you know, like pulling in all of these different sources and trying to get them to think about that.
Yeah, cool. It makes me laugh because my librarian colleague and I sometimes joke after we get a lot of reference questions. We sometimes joke, we wish we were librarians in the 1950s who simply sat at a desk and were asked to look up the capital of Peru, and we delivered that piece of factoid, and then we were the hero.
Yeah.
Kristen's like,
Yep.
longing for the day.
Yeah, we used to have the keys to the kingdom when we had the reverse lookup phone books. Remember in the days before the internet? Yeah.
Yeah. Keys to the kingdom, that's right.
Kristen, you said you had a library example?
Yes. Okay. So I gave a little bit of context at the bottom. This is an Art 400 level class. It's a second visit to the class. I've been working with this faculty for many years, and so she really sees the value in what we do together, but we've also found over the years that we need to chunk out the information. She's an art history professor, but honestly our art program is more studio based, so it's a real learning curve for them to do any sort of art historical research or research papers. So on the first visit, I talk about reference tools, topic formulation, pre-research. And then the second is more that finding and finding articles and books. And so I do a brief PowerPoint, and she has a worksheet that we've been using for years, that just kind of, you know, what's the title, who's the author, what's the subject headings, you know, that kind of stuff. So in the Pentagon. I guess I'll go ahead and start with the find and generate. And so my PowerPoint is very specific to how do I get this worksheet filled out. There is an added layer of complexity in that I'm teaching a citation management tool at the same time, RefWorks, if you've heard of that. So there's students who can get it working on their computers, students who can't. You have to make accounts, and so kind of mixed in all this is and import your references into this RefWorks software. So what I realized and it's funny because I've done this 100 times, but it's just brand new every time I do it, that because there's so much just kind of procedural stuff that I never even really talked about scholarly sources. So I said, yeah, I was missing a PowerPoint slide about that. And the worksheet where, okay, give me one book title, give me a second book title, give me an article title. They're just, even though theoretically they have a research topic, they're just filling out the worksheet, right? They're just going to pick something that'll get them through. And so at first I was feeling kind of badly about that. And then I thought, well, maybe that's okay, right? Maybe they're just doing this and they'll apply it down the road. The evaluation part, once again, the PowerPoint, I didn't really have a slide talking about scholarly sources broadly. Of course, it's mentioned in passing in the lecture, but not really called out. And with the worksheet, again, we say, okay, use this tool, use art and architecture source database, for example, but not really why you would use that tool or what's in them. So when Dustin was talking about, what can you do with the equipment that you have, I definitely found a parallel with that, right? What kind of research can you do when you have this wonderful art comprehensive database? And then it's kind of interesting that the worksheet asks them to kind of repeat the information pieces that they're pulling into their RefWorks account anyway, And so when I was looking at this, I was thinking, well, why are we making them write down the title of the book when they're pulling the citation into RefWorks anyway? And you could have a discussion about, oh, this author seems to really know a lot about French painting. What else, but we don't go there in the worksheet. So it doesn't really, writing down a subject heading isn't forcing them to evaluate or reflect or, who's authoring those pieces. The organizing and management, obviously that's all with RefWorks and the focus on that. And the analyze and synthesize part, I don't really address that in the PowerPoint. And there's this toss off question at the end saying, oh, now that you've done all this work, how does it relate to your thesis? And I don't see the worksheets. I kind of doubt the question is even answered, if you want my honest opinion. So I thought it was interesting that is kind of alluded to, but I don't know what the follow through is on that. And then the communicate and apply. This is all pretty much single person task. Maybe I walk around the room as they're doing the worksheets and maybe I can bring up a point or two here or there, but it's not like pulled together at the end. Let's talk about this. And then right in the middle there, the embark and clarify. While we talk about that a little bit with the topic formulation in the first worksheet that we have, the first session, it's nowhere in the second visit or the second workshop. So that to me, Jesse, when you were saying, what does this exercise do for you? I realized, oh, I've have this sequence of classes that really aren't building upon each other because I did one, the worksheet is 4 years old before we had broken this into chunks. And so I just kind of took that worksheet instead of really creating a worksheet based on, okay, if we were going to chunk this out, how would we approach the research task?
So it sounds like you saw a lot of areas where you're already seeing maybe a gap of or inklings of how you might want to change it. I think it's interesting that you talked about, see, what was it? Like, you don't talk about what kinds of questions could be answered using that database. And it's funny because I taught a couple classes this week, and in both classes, the students were like, well, I thought it was a scholarly journal because I found it in the library.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I just wonder sometimes if we're missing a big opportunity to give them some more skills. I'm sure you've wondered that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any ways you think you might change your approach?
Well, I think in using this framework, so, you know, I had introduced this by saying I used to try to pack a whole bunch of this into one session.
Yeah.
And chunking it out into 3 sessions isn't the whole picture, right? Like, that's only part of the puzzle. So I think I need to go kind of back to square one, using this to really get at what you're talking about. Because, yeah, it's not just a matter of information overload.
Yeah.
Is there a way for you to work with the instructor to help her or him contextualize that within the context of a class beyond your presentation?
Yeah, that did occur to me when I was filling this out. I work with her to a degree, but basically I work off of what she's given me rather than it being a conversation like what you described, Sylvia. Yeah.
Yeah. There are, I would say in my experience as a librarian, there are a few classes that in the last few years, which this is egregious for a librarian. I have said, I'll schedule your class when you can tell me a little bit more about what you want your students to be able to do when they're done.
Mm.
And some have just gone away.
Oh, yeah.
Simply because they weren't willing to enter into a conversation about how this fit in their learning outcomes and what they actually wanted to accomplish. And there's been a range of types of relationships I've been able to develop, from I just come in that 155-minute and I have very little contextual information, and they really do simply want me to show how the database works. And I am hoping and trusting they are contextualizing it from there, all the way to I get a lot more view of their whole class and the sequencing and where it fits. But I have given myself permission, I would say, if they can't articulate what I'm adding to their students, what value I'm bringing to their students, and how it fits, I just that's kind of a requirement, I guess, for me.
Yeah.
Now.
Yeah, no, that's definitely aspirational. It's
Yeah.
so funny. For years I was reaching out to a department and saying, you know, can I do something for you? Oh yeah, you're so nice. And nothing ever happened. And then the faculty sent me an email. I'm sick with pneumonia. Can you take my class? Yeah, and I do it because but they're like, why are we here? And
Right.
so
Yeah.
So I'm going to interject here as a faculty member.
Yeah. Sorry.
No, that's fine. I don't know that my husband's a media specialist, so in K-12, so I kind of get this because I watched what he did in a district that was very big on professional development, and he had a large role in designing professional development, and then moved to a school where it was not valued. professional development. So I get that librarians have this slew of skills that could add something to a class. But it wasn't until I started working with Jessie that and it took a year and a half for me to figure out what to ask and how to ask. And it wasn't so much me figuring out as much as Jessie poking and asking the right questions. And then I finally, one day I just sort of went, oh, I kind of get it. And then she still had to poke and prod some more. But one of the things I've really found is, and it's just been this semester, is for me, looking at the framework for information literacy added a new element to the RSD framework. So in the past, I could use the RSD Pentagon to say, okay, we're going to start this research project, or we're going to do this lesson, and the first step is we're going to go embark and clarify. But for the first time this year, and it speaks to getting the students to think at a deeper level, the framework for information literacy gave me an opportunity to say why it was important. So I used the RSD framework to say we're going to embark and clarify, and then I pulled in, whether it be right or wrong, I pulled in the framework for information literacy and added this time, and we're going to start a conversation. You are going to start building your expertise, and we're going to go out and have a conversation with experts to help you do that. And that conversation will take place in the form of a literature review, in terms of searching databases. And so the framework for information literacy gave me the why they were doing it, and it just added an extra dimension for explanation. And if you could convey to teachers how that framework will help them inform their lessons and inform their students, they might, I think they don't know what to do with the framework because they don't know how to work with it, or where's my example, like how do I use this? And it took me a long time to figure out how I did or how I would use it. But now I'm sitting there in front of class going, duh, I should have thought of this like 10 years ago, and somebody had to beat me over the head and work on me for 3 years to get me to do that. And it wasn't because I was resistant, I just didn't know how. So I think part of the thing of working with faculty is to figure out how to start that conversation. Because I think it's a valuable tool, and I still need to build my skill at it, but at least I took a step in the right direction, I hope. So.
That's very helpful.
As another teacher end of it, it's very helpful to hear your librarian experience, because I really struggle with I would like to have more, like you're talking about this 2 days, like you get to work with these students for 2 days. Like I want more of that on our campus, but we also have this sort of silo approach, like reaching out and working with somebody else to have them work with your class is sort of, I don't want to say frowned down, but it's like you're not doing your job because you're asking somebody else to be in the classroom. And I'm trying to figure out, it's great to hear that librarians want that, because that makes me feel better about asking for it. But is there a cultural, like a culture of compartmentalization on your campus that you can overcome, or that needs to be overcome? Because I definitely feel like there is on our campus.
A resounding yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been very, very hard work to bridge anywhere. Yep.
I think one of the things I think helped is we started our conversation within a community of practice looking at research skill development. And so one of the things I liked about the RSD Pentagon and the whole community of practice is that it gave us a reason to break down those silos. So now you were having those conversations across departments and with librarians because it was part of a scholarly endeavor to improve your teaching or to bring a better learning experience to the students. And I'm not sure anybody can argue with that. Well, I'm sure somebody can, but.
I think if you make it very explicit what learning outcome it means for you to bring in more voices and a wider point of view, I mean, there's no, if you're clear about the pedagogical purpose of that, and it's not just, I'm sick, please cover my class, which we do get, the librarian or whoever the partner is going to be happy to add their expertise, I think, to your course, because it'll be clear what they bring to it, and to your administration, it'll be clear why that's part of the learning, that's a learning tool. And in February-ish, when we start digging into the framework a little bit more deeply, one of the assignments actually will be go find a librarian and have a conversation.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thanks, Sylvia. It's so good to hear. Again, I mean, that's our expertise blind spot, really, is kind of what we have to bring to that table, teaching and learning wise, and to remind ourselves as librarians that we need to be better communicators.
And we all live in silos. It's really hard.
It is really hard.
And beyond the silo thing, I think I often struggle with the desire to not add to anybody's workload. And so it just seems
it's so nice.
Yeah, it just seems so egregious to ask somebody to like come and help me with this, which is an absurd thing to think. But that is, you know, there's that piece. Like I'm always feeling like I am. Like we talked about at the beginning of the meeting today, like we're all just like barely keeping up, but also recognizing that it's really fun to step out of your own concerns and help with somebody else's. And I think maybe as faculty, we can remind ourselves that asking librarians to be involved is not making their life worse.
It's not cheating.
No.
I really have found collaboration outside of my own little fishbowl to be very refreshing. It's helped keep me from burning out. So, and unlike you, I am not opposed to dumping extra work in Jesse's lap.
That goes both ways.
So poor Jesse's been connived into more things by ideas, but she's been very willing to help. Thanks, Jessie.
It's fun.
So are there other things that we want to talk about today, or should we discuss some needs that you folks have moving forward that maybe we're not touching on?
I think one thing I'm struggling with right now is all of the places that I want to apply this are my fall semester classes. And I think I have a little bit more liberty in the classes that I teach in the fall to make big changes like this than I do in the spring. But I'm trying to, Jessie and I emailed a little bit about this because my spring semester classes, they're seniors, like, but they're often lacking in some of these skills that we're talking about. And yet it seems a little bit like too little too late to throw in one tiny little unit of this stuff toward the end of the semester, which again, that's about this. Just, I should think, you know, we're doing it and it's good. But do you have any advice for how to sort of fit something like this into an existing list of activities?
So that sentiment of like too little too late, what you may actually want to do is a what is project, which is basically taking the framework as a lens to analyze what is going on.
Okay.
So that you can identify where you'd rather your seniors be and make some recommendations backward.
Okay.
I mean, you could design a learning intervention. I think that's what we typically think about when we think of SOTL is like, there has to be an intervention. but there doesn't. Sometimes it's just a description.
Okay.
So basically, I think you're looking at a program review if that's the case, or taking a look at your class and then saying, here's the end goal, here's where optimum, where could they be here, here, and here.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, that helps because it means that I'm not trying to shoehorn in a brand new thing, a brand new approach to the material, because there's so much of the expectations that you set with students very early on in a sequence of classes, and like if you try and change that at the end, then it's a problem versus trying to change it at the beginning, and then you can bring people up in a new path.
Yeah. So you might be looking at like a pre-post, or you'll probably add some assessment type things like a reflection here or something like that in order to measure. I don't know, Sylvia actually might have some more ideas about measuring.
So if I'm hearing correctly, Jesse, are you suggesting looking at all the classes in the program?
I would just pick one. I would choose the one where you either feel like it's really not working in this area, or they're really not where they should be. And I would actually also limit it down to one or two of either the frames or pieces of the RSD. I mean, you could actually measure them on the frames, like, do they understand that authority is constructed and contextual? Do they understand that scholarship is a conversation? But then map the class on the RSD and use them together.
Okay.
Is one way you might do it. But I would even narrow down which pieces of the RSD and the framework you're using, because it's kind of big.
Yeah, I would not be comfortable taking on a whole class, let alone a whole program at this point. Just
right,
like that.
Choose what's most important to you. And one of the ones I feel like this group keeps coming back to is that inquiry, the information literacy framework about inquiry and an inquiry mindset. I don't know if that's consistent with some of the classes you're teaching in the spring, but that might be the creative class, the creative thinking class you're taking now is why you're really circling around that one.
Yeah.
But identify what the spring would need. What strengths should they have graduating?
Yeah, and I think that's part of my problem right now is I'm just very wrapped up in the classes that I'm teaching right now.
Yeah.
And so I'm seeing how all of this stuff can apply to this, and I'm seeing how it can apply to the spring semester stuff, but I'm not seeing how to work it in.
Yeah.
So I'm still working around that.
Yeah, and we can talk more about that if you need someone to bounce off of. Maybe Sylvia and you and I could even meet.
Okay.
So one of the things you talk about, oh, this is just a really little step. When we started our community of practice here, we were going to map the whole program, and we went into this like, okay, let's map the program against the RSD, and then we'll pick something to do in our classes to help contribute to that. By the end of the first month, we were like, let's do a lesson. So, I mean, we had great ambitions, but the thing I would encourage you to do is just actually start small with something that's low stakes and practice with it. Start with a lesson. It might be I'm not sure it's too little too late. I think you look at it more as you're starting on a journey to learn how to use a tool, and then you'll find that it'll grow from an assignment to a second assignment to a course revision to a program evaluation. I mean, it's pretty flexible, but I think you need to gain some comfort with it first.
Sure.
And it takes a while. It took me a year to feel comfortable, and then it took me another year to go, oh, this is pretty cool.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to start small. No,
I 2 years ago, I was a fellow in a program that was doing that was the task was to pick a lesson and redesign it to meet current SOTL research, right? And every meeting they're like, small, go small. And I'm like, oh, 3 chapters is good. Like, I can do 3 chapters in a year. And it was one of those, like, every single meeting they're like, nope, smaller. I'm feeling like that, and I'm being the person that's going, I need to go smaller.
Yep.
So.
Mm.
Any other thought? Oh,
Go ahead.
go, Kristen. Nope.
Well, no, I had a question, so I don't want to, if there was something to continue. So this is one thing that's a little bit unclear to me with these final projects, is that they seem very individual, but we had signed up as groups. Like, how does, what's the group aspect of this whole thing?
That's a great question. So when we decided to launch this community of practice, we had no idea if we would have 3 people or 40. So in the beginning, we had envisioned of, creating smaller work groups so that you had at least 2 or 3 other people who are becoming very familiar with your context and with your project and could give you feedback. We're getting the sense that the amount of people who want to fully participate, especially at the level of doing a project, is probably manageable to where we won't use those work groups.
Okay. So that kind of helps me to, like chicken and egg kind of thing. Do I have a group? Do I do a project?
Yep. I'm sorry we haven't been more clear about that.
No, that's okay.
We're just getting to probably clarity on who our people are.
Okay.
You're our people. You've shown up.
Yes, we're looking at our people.
I'm sorry to put that pressure on you, but you are it.
This is the pod, folks.
Yep, there's a few more people we know who are watching recordings and kind of following along just to learn around the edges, and that's great. But I think this is our work group.
Okay.
One thing I want to say regarding that, so I've gotten my schedule of what I'm teaching next semester, and I'm teaching during these meetings.
Oh, okay.
So I'll still be working on implementing everything that we'll be designing, but I'll have to report on it some other way and be watching all your recordings and all that.
Well, if this is our pod, we do have some freedom to possibly adjust the times.
Okay.
So
yep.
we can look at that maybe later December and see where people are at as far as participation.
I hadn't even thought about that, but yeah, my schedule will change in the spring too, but I don't know what it is right now.
Yeah.
Right. I think all of ours will change. Mine is changing too, so.
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else that we need to discuss? Any other questions, concerns? Well, thanks. I'm glad you folks did the alignment. It was great to hear what you did. I enjoyed seeing them and talking about them. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
I learned so much from seeing how other people apply in their context. So I'm really
Thanks
grateful.
for doing the demos. They were great. Very, very helpful.
Okay, good.
I have to go watch them now.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, have a great day.
Thank you.
You guys have a good couple of weeks. We'll see you in 3 weeks.